Joining us now on the Megacast is Michael Greiner, Assistant Professor of Management in Oakland University's School of Business Administration, joining us once again on today's Megacast. Michael, appreciate you coming on.
It's great to be here, Tyler. We've got a lot to talk about. It's a big week in business news.
Yeah, it certainly has. I think the biggest of all has been the announcement from the Biden administration earlier this week by executive order, sweeping student loan forgiveness upwards of about $10,000 in student loan relief for many Americans, even more for those that are in lower income situations and those that received Pell Grants in order to pay for their university or college education. In terms of whether or not this will go forward as is, based on any legal blowback that may come at the administration or in attempts to push this back, particularly from those on the opposite side of the aisle, when would you say you would expect this to really be in motion after it's been announced? Because it can be announced and that's great news and everything for a lot of people, but it's not really going to affect their pocketbooks for a while.
Yes, you're right about that. Basically, what we see right now is that the administration has extended the pause on student loan payments to the end of the year. My guess is that we'll at least have some guidance by then in terms of what's going to happen. But, there's certainly a chance that this could go all the way to the Supreme Court. One of the big issues is who can challenge it, because, for example, the Supreme Court in prior years had ruled that nobody has what's called standing. They don't have enough interest in the issue to be able to sue the government over the CIA budget, for example. So just saying, hey, I'm a taxpayer in the United States doesn't give you enough standing to bring a lawsuit like that. So my guess is that's going to be kind of the biggest challenge that some of the opponents are going to have. But we do know that the Supreme Court has been somewhat hostile to I guess you could say White House overreach and regulatory overreach. So we'll see what happens with it. But certainly, I think by the end of the year, we should have a pretty good indication of what's going to be happening.
And regardless of if it is the about $10,000, up to $10,000 in loan forgiveness for some Americans, or a little bit more for those on Pell Grants and in lower income situations, regardless if that's the final number or it's something different, there are some concerns out there from the public. There was an interesting poll conducted earlier on this month until about the middle of the month by Momentive, and among the over 5,000 adults that were polled, about 59% of them said they were concerned that student loan forgiveness could make the inflation situation even worse. You're putting all that money back out there, or at the very least, you're not requiring all that money to come back to those that it's owed to, and that could affect other people down the pike. How valid is that as a concern, with all this money not necessarily going back out into the economy from the government, but not coming back in to some of these loan agencies that have provided these funds for these education costs?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's really the big challenge from a policy standpoint that its opponents are bringing up, aside from kind of questions of, is it fair? Is it not fair? Whatever. I mean, that's everybody's going to have their own opinion on that. But from kind of an economic standpoint, I know people are really concerned about inflation, and rightfully so. Although we just got some good news this morning, so here's a little bit of breaking news for you, that actually the Fed's preferred index of inflation, their preferred measure of inflation, actually slowed a little bit last month. So it's not down to where we'd like to see it. It's not down to about the 2% area. But I think that the most recent measure is about 4.4%. Which is down from the prior month at 4.6%. So it shows that inflation is starting to slow a little bit, and that's all good news. And the Federal Reserve, of course, today is meeting in Jackson Hole, and we'll see what they have to say about what they're going to do next about this. My guess is they're going to continue to increase interest rates. People are concerned about inflation, and rightfully so. I mean, this is really something that's been unprecedented in the lives of most people, except for some older folks like me who remember back in the early 1980s and late 1970s when we last saw relatively high inflation. I can see why they're concerned about it. That being said, personally, I do not think this is a big issue. And most of the economists who I respect, who I've read their opinions from, tend to kind of fall on this side of the equation, which is that $300 billion is the amount that's estimated as a cost for this program. And that sounds like a lot of money, and it is. I'm not going to try to downplay it, but you have to remember that's $300 billion, number one, over 10 years. Number two, out of a nearly $3 trillion economy in the United States. So in terms of the total impact on the amount of money that's flowing in and out around our economy, it's relatively small. What's more is, even if we accept the way that they've accounted for this, you have to remember that government kind of has its own way of accounting things. So the actual real impact on the budget could actually be quite a bit lower than $300 billion. And the final point on that is also, we have to remember that with the Inflation Reduction Act, that included a $300 billion down payment on the deficit. So basically what we did is we took the funds that are being charged to higher income individuals and new taxes under the Inflation Reduction Act, and we're using that to help finance the debt relief that's going to middle class families for the most part. So my guess is that the impact's going to be pretty small. And then the last thing I think is important to note too is we've been on this pause of loan payments for quite some time now. I think it's a couple of years now, actually, that it's been paused. And as a result of that, people haven't been making those payments. So basically we're saying, okay, now people don't need to pay back loans that they haven't been paying back anyway. So it's kind of like, it's not going to mean more money in their pockets. It's not going to mean some kind of impact that people are going to be able to go out and start spending more money left and right. And we have to, by comparison, the original COVID Relief Act that was passed, that many people have pointed to as being part of the problem, included $1.9 trillion in spending in 1 year. And again, you have to contrast that with $300 billion over 10 years. And when you look at it, you can kind of see they really are apples and oranges.
Yeah, a lot of the conversation you're seeing on this matter, particularly for those that are in favor of even greater student loan forgiveness against those that are claiming that this to be an unfair measure by the White House by executive order, is that, well, all that money went out into the economy for PPP loans, and a lot of that, if not a vast majority of that, had been forgiven by the government. And those were loans from the government. This is simply just a reduction of what's owed on these loans. And also in this article, in an article I'm referencing from CNBC, the poll from Momentive also indicated that a lot of these borrowers would say, regardless of how much relief they might get, their spending habits are not very likely to change. And I think you made a great point too, Michael, by saying with the pause on the student loan repayments during the pandemic, which has now lasted a couple of years, people haven't been paying these bills anyway. They haven't been spending more based on that anyway. And even if this relief goes through, it's not so much that for a vast majority of these debtors, over 44 million Americans owing about $1.7 trillion in federal student loan debt at this moment in time, according to this article from CNBC, they're simply going to be paying a little bit less per month on their student loan repayments in most cases. In some, it may pay it off, but in most cases, it's going to be giving them a little bit more money in their pocket than they would have had pre-pandemic per month, given their student loan payments. But it's going to still have an impact when those come back into impacting their pocketbook every month.
Right. Right. And if I could just make one point, and I kind of hate to step into the whole fairness debate here, but I think this is relevant here. I did see one study that pointed out the fact that the benefits of this are targeted squarely at the middle class. In fact, the majority of the benefits from this program, when you look at the raw dollars, are going to go right to that middle fifth, of the income in the United States. So I think that that's encouraging, because of the fact that that's the group that sometimes feels most squeezed. A lot of the time they feel that, we earn too much money to get some of the benefits that say people who are in the lower income area get, but yet we don't make enough money where we're comfortable and we can take advantage of some of the tax shelters and some of the investments and that type of thing that the very wealthy get. So I think that it's actually interesting to note that this is a benefit that really is going to go to a group that, generally speaking, has not gotten a lot of benefit from the government in the past.
We're joined by Michael Greiner, assistant professor at the Oakland University School of Management within their School of Business Administration, joining us on the Megacast, oakland.edu, for more information on that. Lastly, Michael, we're a little bit over time, but I want to talk about this with you because it certainly will have global economic impact. China's economy has seen a little bit of a struggle in recent months following a surge of COVID-19 in late May. What is their economic situation looking like? And if it continues to have a little bit of a struggle as it's had as a result of that resurgence of COVID a couple months ago, how could that impact the wider world economy, especially here in the U.S. in the future?
Yeah, well, China's actually got some very fundamental problems here. And I think this is one of perhaps the most underreported stories going on right now in the United States. So I'm really glad you brought this up. China basically right now is going through the kind of crisis that we went through here in the United States in 2008 and 2009, except on steroids. Basically, what's happened is about a year ago, they had their largest property developer, a company called Evergrande, which actually was the largest private issuer of debt in the entire world. And that company ended up defaulting on their debt, essentially going bankrupt. And as a result of that, since then, the Chinese real estate economy has been in free fall. And that's no minor thing, because the Chinese real estate economy at this point represents about 30% of their gross domestic product. Now, we know about the COVID issues, obviously, and the shutdowns and how they continue to do that. And that's caused real problems with the supply chains and has resulted in a lot of businesses actually moving their production facilities out of China to other countries. And in fact, I saw one recent report that showed that the United States has had more businesses returning jobs, manufacturing jobs to the United States than at any time in the last 20 years. I think that that's really telling, given the fact that there has been these issues with the COVID crisis that have shown the limitations of kind of relying upon a globalized supply chain. And there are advantages to having your supply chain right here in the United States. And so China has these two big issues, but beyond that, they have some very fundamental issues that are really kind of driving these economic problems that they have. Number one, they're dealing with a huge drought. We think that we've got a drought here in the Western United States. Literally, in China, they spent billions building one of the largest public development projects in the world, in what's called the Three Gorges Dam. The water supply to that dam has almost completely dried up. So they're dealing with problems with drinking water. They're dealing with problems with generating electricity, and those things aren't talked about. And at the same time, China just continues to build more and more coal plants, which only exacerbates the problem for them and makes the pollution and the drought situation there even worse for them. So they're dealing with some fundamental environmental issues there. And then what's more is they're dealing with some very, very problematic demographic issues. One of the big things that you always worry about with a developed country is at a certain point here, women start having fewer children on average. And what that means is you have fewer younger people. As a result of that, those young people tend to be the ones who bring dynamism into the economy, have new ideas, have the energy, and they're not kind of retired, old fogies like I'm getting to be, who are just sitting around collecting Social Security, and nothing against retired people. I'm going to be one soon, but the point is that the young people are the ones who bring the energy to the economy. Well, as it turns out, China had a one-child policy for a number of years where they essentially were stopping Chinese families from having more children. Well, the result of that has been, number one, there's a huge imbalance in terms of men versus women in China, that there are, I think as much as 20% of young men in China are unable to find women in China to date and to marry. So there's this imbalance there, which is creating a real family crisis there. And what's more is because of this this restriction on the birth rate, now you have really an older population in China that this smaller and smaller group of working people are going to have to continue to support going forward. Now, China has made some efforts to try to reverse that by trying to encourage families to have more children. But, at a certain point here, these things become ingrained in families. And in fact, I saw some statistics that indicate that China has actually reached its peak of population now already, and that they've actually already started declining their population. And so the result is that the estimate is by the year 2100, China and the United States will have the same population. Now, the reason that's relevant here is because from an economic standpoint, you have to remember gross domestic product, the total amount of goods and economic activity that we produced is based on the amount of activity that each person is able to produce. We call it gross domestic product per capita. And so part of the reason China has been growing so fast, they have so many people. Their GDP per capita is still much smaller than the United States, but since they have so many people, it's been growing very quickly. Well, if they start declining in their population, they're going to have trouble sustaining that level of growth. So I think in the long run, China has some very, very serious issues it's going to have to be dealing with.
And those issues in China are going to have impacts all across the global economy. Michael, thank you very much for joining us today.
Happy to be here, Tyler. Thanks for having me.